The millionaire checked the waitress's bag and found a photo. It was his long-lost love. Lucas Johnson stood at the window of his penthouse office, his gaze fixed on the bustling city below. At 52, he was the epitome of success, a self-made millionaire with a restaurant empire that spanned the country. Yet, as he watched the tiny figures hurrying along the streets, he felt an emptiness that no amount of wealth could fill. His fingers absently traced the edge of a worn photograph on his desk. It showed a younger version of himself, arm in arm with a beautiful woman with sparkling eyes and a carefree smile. Margaret. Even after 21 years, the sight of her face still made his heart ache. A sharp knock on the door jolted him from his reverie. "Mr. Johnson," his assistant called. "The meeting is about to start." Lucas sighed, tucking the photo into his desk drawer. "I'll be right there," he replied, straightening his tie and composing himself. The mask of the successful businessman slid back into place, hiding the turmoil beneath. The meeting dragged on, discussions of profit margins and expansion plans washing over Lucas in a dull wave. His mind kept drifting back to the photograph, to Margaret, to the life they should have had together. It wasn't until he heard a commotion outside the conference room that he snapped back to attention. "I'm sorry, sir," he heard his assistant saying, "but you can't go in there." The door burst open, and a young woman in a waitress uniform stumbled in, her face flushed with anger and determination. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to talk to you about the missing money from the register." Lucas stared at her, momentarily stunned. There was something hauntingly familiar about her features, the shape of her eyes, the curve of her cheek. It was like looking at a ghost, or rather, at the daughter of one. "Everyone out," he said abruptly, his eyes never leaving the young woman's face. "We'll continue this later." As the room cleared, Lucas approached the waitress slowly, his heart pounding. "What's your name?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Hannah," she replied, lifting her chin defiantly. "Hannah Mitchell." Mitchell! Margaret's maiden name. Lucas felt the room spin around him as the realization hit. This wasn't just any employee standing before him. This was his daughter, the child he never knew existed. "Hannah," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. I think we need to talk." Confusion flickered across Hannah's face, her anger momentarily forgotten. "Talk? About what? I came here about the missing money, not to." "Not about that," Lucas interrupted, struggling to keep his voice steady. "About your mother, about Margaret." Hannah's eyes widened, a mix of shock and disbelief washing over her features. "How do you know my mother's name?" she demanded, taking a step back. "Who are you?" Lucas took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would change both their lives forever. "Hannah," he said softly, "I'm your father." The silence that followed was deafening. Hannah stared at him, her face a whirlwind of emotions, confusion, anger, disbelief, and somewhere beneath it all, a flicker of hope. Lucas could see the wheels turning in her mind, pieces of a lifelong puzzle suddenly falling into place. "No," Hannah said, finally shaking her head. "No, that's not possible." My mother said he was dead." Lucas felt a sharp pain in his chest at her words. Dead. Is that what Margaret had told their daughter? Had she truly believed it, or was it a lie to protect Hannah from the truth? "I'm very much alive," Lucas said gently, "and I had no idea you existed until this moment. But looking at you now, there's no doubt in my mind. You're the spitting image of your mother." Anar's legs seemed to give out beneath her, and she sank into a nearby chair, her face pale. "This can't be happening," she murmured, more to herself than to Lucas. "All these years I thought I never knew." Lucas knelt beside her, fighting the urge to reach out and comfort her. He knew he had no right, not yet. "I know this is a shock," he said. "Believe me, I'm just as stunned as you are. But I swear to you, Hannah, I'll explain everything. Everything I know, at least." Hannah looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Why?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why did you never come for us? Why did you let us think you were dead?" The accusation in her voice cut Lucas to the core. "I didn't know," he said, the words heavy with regret. "Your mother, she disappeared 21 years ago. I've been searching for her ever since. I never knew she was pregnant when she left." Hannah's brow furrowed, confusion replacing some of the anger in her eyes. "Disappeared? But that's not, Mom always said." Lucas nodded, understanding her bewilderment. "I think there's a lot about the past that neither of us knows," he said gently. "But if you're willing, I'd like to find out the truth." Together. For a long moment, Hannah said nothing, simply staring at Lucas as if trying to reconcile the man before her with the father she'd always imagined. Finally, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Okay," she whispered, "I want to know the truth. About you, about Mom, about everything." Lucas felt a surge of hope, tempered by the knowledge that the road ahead would be far from easy. But for the first time in 21 years, he felt like he was on the right path. To whatever secrets the past held, whatever challenges lay ahead, he was determined to face them. For Hannah, for Margaret, for the family he'd lost and found in the span of a single extraordinary day. As Lucas led Hannah to his private office, memories of Margaret flooded his mind, and he could still remember the day they made 25 years ago at a charity gala. Margaret had been radiant in a blue dress, her laughter infectious as she charmed everyone around her. Lucas had been smitten from the moment their eyes met. "Please sit," Lucas said, gesturing to a comfortable chair as they entered his office. Hannah perched on the edge, her posture tense and guarded. Lucas took a deep breath, wondering where to begin. "Your mother and I met in 1999, he started, his voice soft with nostalgia. "We fell in love quickly, and for a while, everything was perfect. We had plans, dreams." He trailed off, lost in thought. Hannah leaned forward, her curiosity overcoming her caution. "What kind of dreams?" Lucas smiled sadly. "We wanted to travel the world, start a family, build a life together. I was just starting my first restaurant, and Margaret was my rock. She believed in me when no one else did." As Lucas spoke, he moved to his desk and pulled out an old photo album. He hesitated for a moment before handing it to Hannah. She took it gingerly, as if it might burn her. "This is us," Lucas explained as Hannah opened the album, "your mother and me in happier times." Hannah's fingers trembled as she traced the outlines of her mother's face in the photographs. Margaret looked so young, so carefree, so different from the quiet, reserved woman Hannah had known growing up. "What happened?" Hannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you loved each other so much, why did she leave?" Lucas's face darkened. "It was my fault," he admitted, the words heavy with regret. "We had a fight, a terrible argument. I said things I didn't mean, things I've regretted every day since." He closed his eyes, remembering that fateful night. The shouting, the tears, the slam of the door as Margaret stormed out. "I was stressed about the restaurant, about money. When Margaret told me she was pregnant, I reacted badly. I was scared, selfish. I told her it wasn't the right time, that we couldn't afford a baby." Hannah's grip on the photo album tightened. "So you didn't want me," she said, her voice cold. "No," Lucas exclaimed, his eyes snapping open. "God, no. I was an idiot, Hannah. I was overwhelmed and I lashed out. But I loved your mother, and if I had known about you, I would have moved heaven and earth to be there for you both." Hannah didn't look convinced, but she nodded for him to continue. Lucas sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "After our fight, Margaret left. I thought she just needed time to cool off, but days passed, then weeks. I searched everywhere for her, filed missing persons reports, hired private investigators, but it was like she'd vanished into thin air." "Ah. She didn't vanish," Hannah said quietly. "She was with me." Lucas nodded, his heart aching. "I see that now. But at the time I had no idea. I thought something terrible had happened to her. I never stopped looking, never stopped hoping I'd find her one day." As Lucas spoke, a memory stirred in the back of his mind, something about that time that had always bothered him, but he'd never been able to put his finger on it. "There was someone else," he said slowly, piecing it together as he spoke. "Someone who was acting strangely after Margaret disappeared. My business partner, Conrad." Hannah's brow furrowed. "Conrad? You've never mentioned him before." Lucas's expression hardened. Conrad and I started the restaurant together. We were like brothers, or so I thought. But after Margaret left, he changed. He became distant, secretive. At the time, I was too caught up in my grief to really notice, but looking back, a chill ran down Lucas's spine as the pieces started to fall into place. "Oh my God," he whispered, realization dawning. "Conrad, he must have known something. He must have been involved somehow." Hannah leaned forward, her eyes wide. "Involved in what? What are you talking about?" Lucas stood up abruptly, pacing the room as his mind raced. "I think Conrad might have had something to do with your mother's disappearance." "Inada's disappearance. It's the only thing that makes sense. He was acting so strangely, and he was the one who convinced me to stop searching after a few years, to focus on the business instead." "But why?" Hannah asked, confusion evident in her voice. "Why would he do that?" Lucas stopped pacing, turning to face Hannah with a grim expression. "Because Conrad wasn't just my business partner. He is my brother, my long-lost brother." Hannah's jaw dropped. "Your brother? But how is that possible?" Lucas sank back into his chair, feeling the weight of decades of secrets pressing down on him. "It's a long story. Conrad and I were separated as children when our parents divorced. I grew up with our mother, he went with our father. We reconnected as adults, but we kept our relationship a secret. We thought it would be better for the business if people didn't know we were related." He laughed bitterly. "We thought we were so clever keeping that secret, but now I wonder if there were other secrets Conrad was keeping. Bigger ones." "Ah." Hannah sat in stunned silence, trying to process this new information. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "So you think your brother, my uncle, had something to do with my mother's disappearance? But why? What possible reason could he have?" Lucas shook his head, his mind whirling with possibilities. "I don't know. Maybe he was jealous of what Margaret and I had. Maybe he thought she would come between us, between the business. Or maybe he trailed off, a horrible thought occurring to him. Maybe what?" Hannah pressed. Lucas met her gaze, his eyes dark with worry. Maybe he was in love with her too. The silence that followed was deafening. Hannah stared at Lucas, her face a mix of shock, disbelief and growing anger. "This is insane," she said finally. "All of it. My whole life has been a lie, and now you're telling me there's some grand conspiracy involving your long-lost brother." Lucas understood her skepticism. It did sound far-fetched, like something out of a soap opera, but the more he thought about it, the more certain he became. "I know it sounds crazy," he said gently, "but I swear to you, Hannah, I'm telling you the truth. And I think if we dig deeper, we'll find that the truth is even more complicated than we imagine." Hannah stood up abruptly, hugging herself as if for protection. "I need time to think," she said, her voice shaky. It's too much." Lucas nodded, understanding her need for space. "Of course, take all the time you need. But Hannah," he added, as she turned to leave, "please be careful. If I'm right about Conrad, he might be dangerous. Don't confront him on your own." Inal paused at the door, looking back at Lucas with a mix of emotions in her eyes. "I won't," she promised. "But this isn't over. I want answers and I'm going to get them. With or without your help." As the door closed behind her, Lucas slumped in his chair, feeling the weight of 21 years of secrets and lies pressing down on him. He had found his daughter, but in doing so, he had opened a Pandora's box of long-buried truths. Whatever came next, he knew their lives would never be the same again. The next few days passed in a blur for Lucas. He threw himself into investigating Conrad's past, searching for any clue that might on Margaret's disappearance. Hannah, true to her word, had kept her distance, but Lucas could sense her conducting her own investigation. He worried about her safety but respected her need for space. It was on the 4th day that Lucas received a mysterious phone call. The voice on the other end was gruff, distorted, clearly disguised. "Dear Mr. Johnson," the voice said, "I hear you've been asking questions about the past, and that's dangerous territory." Lucas's grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this? What do you know?" "Let's just say I'm someone who knows things. Things about Conrad, About Margaret. If you want answers, come to the old pier tonight at midnight. Come alone." The line went dead before Lucas could respond. He stared at the phone, his heart racing. This could be a trap, but it could also be the lead he'd been waiting for. He debated calling Hannah, but decided against it. He needed to handle this himself. As midnight approached, Lucas made his way to the abandoned pier. The night was misty, the old wooden planks creaking ominously under his feet. He peered into the darkness, straining to see any sign of his mysterious informant. "I'm glad you came," a voice said from the shadows. A figure stepped forward, face obscured by a hood. "You've opened a dangerous door, Mr. Johnson. Are you sure you're ready for what's on the other side?" Lucas stood his ground, fighting the urge to step back. "I've been ready for 21 years. Tell me what you know." The figure chuckled darkly. "It's not that simple. The truth, it's uglier than you can imagine. Conrad didn't just take Margaret, he destroyed her." Lucas felt his blood run cold. "What do you mean, destroyed her?" "Conrad was obsessed with her," the figure continued. "He couldn't stand seeing her with you, so he planned everything. The fight, the pregnancy scare, all of it. He manipulated both of you, pushing you apart." Lucas's mind reeled. "But why? Why go to such lengths?" "So as he wanted her for himself," the figure said simply, "and he wanted to destroy you in the process. Taking Margaret was just the first step. He's been playing a long game, Lucas, a very long game." Before Lucas could respond, he heard footsteps behind him. He whirled around to see Hannah emerging from the mist, her face pale but determined. "I followed you," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I couldn't just sit back and do nothing." The hooded figure tensed, clearly not expecting this development. "This complicates things," they muttered. Lucas moved protectively in front of Hannah. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Why should we believe anything you're saying?" The figure hesitated, then slowly lowered their hood. Lucas gasped as he recognized the face of his old assistant, Sarah. She looked older, haunted, but it was undeniably her. "Sarah?" Lucas whispered. "But you disappeared years ago. We thought." "You thought wrong," Sarah said grimly. "I didn't disappear. I ran, because I knew too much, saw too much. Conrad, he's dangerous, Lucas. More dangerous than you can imagine." Hannah stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "What do you know about my mother? Where is she?" Sarah's expression softened as she looked at Hannah. "You look just like her," she said softly. "Margaret, she's alive. But she's not the same woman you knew, Hannah. Conrad's kept her isolated, manipulated her mind. She might not even remember who she really is anymore." Lucas felt his knees go weak. Margaret was alive. After all these years, she was alive. But what had Conrad done to her? The thought made him sick. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Tell us where to find her." Sarah shook her head. "It's not that simple. Conrad has her hidden away, guarded, and he's got people everywhere watching. If you go after her directly, you'll never make it." "Then what do we do?" Hannah demanded, frustration evident in her voice. "We can't just leave her there." Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. "This contains everything I've gathered over the years. Financial records, communications, evidence of Conrad's crimes. It's not enough to bring him down completely, but it's a start." She handed the drive to Lucas, her eyes serious. "Be careful with this. If Conrad finds out you have it, he won't hesitate to eliminate you both." Lucas took the drive, feeling its weight in his hand. It was small, innocuous, but he knew it held the key to unraveling the mystery that had defined his life for over 2 decades. "Why are you helping us?" Hannah asked Sarah, suspicion clear in her voice. Sarah's face darkened. "Because I was part of it," she admitted. "I helped Conrad in the beginning. I didn't know how far he would go, what he was really planning. By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. This is my way of trying to make things right." Lucas stared at Sarah, a mix of anger and gratitude warring inside him. She had been part of the conspiracy that tore his family apart, but now she was risking everything to help them. "What do we do now?" he asked. Sarah glanced around nervously, as if expecting Conrad's men to materialize from the mist at any moment. "Use the information on that drive. Follow the money, the connections, but be careful. Conrad has eyes and ears everywhere. Trust no one." With that, she pulled her hood back up and melted into the shadows, leaving Lucas and Hannah alone on the pier. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of what they had learned, of the task ahead, seemed almost insurmountable. Finally, Hannah broke the silence. "I still don't trust you completely," she said to Lucas, her voice quiet but firm. "But I think we need to work together on this. For Mom's sake." Lucas nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in years. "Together," he agreed, "we'll bring her home, Hannah. I promise." As they left the pier, both lost in thought, neither noticed the figure watching them from a nearby rooftop. Conrad lowered his binoculars, a cold smile playing on his lips. "Oh, brother," he murmured, "you have no idea what you're getting into." The game was on, and the stakes were higher than ever. The cabin stood isolated in the dense forest, a solitary structure weathered by time and neglect. Lucas and Hannah approached cautiously, their hearts pounding with anticipation and fear. The information on Sarah's flash drive had led them here, to this remote location where Margaret had supposedly been kept for years. "Are you ready for this?" Lucas asked softly, glancing at Hannah. She nodded, her jaw set with determination. "I've been ready my whole life." They reached the front door, and Lucas raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. What if Margaret didn't remember them? What if she didn't want to be found? Taking a deep breath, he rapped on the wooden door. For a long moment there was silence. Then slowly they heard footsteps approaching. The door creaked open, and there she was. Margaret stood in the doorway, her once vibrant hair now streaked with grey, her face lined with years of worry and isolation. But her eyes, those eyes that Lucas had dreamed about for 2 decades, were the same. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her gaze shifted to Hannah, and her eyes widened in recognition and disbelief. "Hannah? Huh? Tea?" "Mom," Hannah choked out, tears welling in her eyes. Margaret stumbled backward, overwhelmed by the sight before her. How did you find me?" Lucas stepped forward, his heart aching to hold her but restraining himself. "It's a long story, Margaret. Can we come in? We have so much to talk about." Margaret nodded numbly, stepping aside to let them enter. The interior of the cabin was sparse, with only basic furnishings. It was clear that this had been a place of confinement, not comfort. As they settled into the small living area, an awkward silence fell over them. 21 years of separation, of unasked questions and unspoken truths hung heavy in the air. Finally, Hannah spoke, her voice quivering with emotion. "Why, Mom? Why did you leave us? Why did you let me believe Dad was dead?" Margaret flinched at the accusation in her daughter's voice. "Oh, Hannah," she said softly, reaching out to touch her daughter's face. "I never wanted to leave you. You have to believe that. But Conrad, he gave me no choice." Lucas leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What did Conrad do, Margaret? We know he was involved, but we need to hear it from you." Margaret's eyes clouded with painful memories. "After our fight, Lucas, I was so hurt, so confused. I went to Conrad for advice. He told me you didn't want the baby, that you were planning to leave us both. He said he could protect me, keep us safe." Lucas felt a surge of anger. "And you believed him? Margaret, I loved you. I would never have abandoned you or our child." "I know that now," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "But back then I was scared and vulnerable. Conrad was so convincing. He told me he had evidence that you were involved in illegal activities, that if I went back to you, you'd be arrested and I'd lose everything." Hannah interjected, her voice tight with confusion and hurt. "But why stay away for so long? Why not try to contact us?" "I suppose." Margaret's face crumpled with shame and regret. "Conrad kept me isolated. He told me it was for my own protection, that you were both better off without me. He drugged me, manipulated my memories. For years I wasn't even sure what was real anymore." Lucas felt sick to his stomach. The depths of Conrad's betrayal, the extent of his manipulation, was beyond anything he had imagined. "Oh, Margaret," he said softly, I'm so sorry. I should have found you sooner. I should have known. Margaret shook her head, tears streaming down her face. You couldn't have known. Conrad was always 2 steps ahead. He had this all planned from the beginning. Hannah, who had been quietly processing everything, suddenly stood up. I need some air, she said abruptly, her voice strained. She hurried outside, leaving Lucas and Margaret alone. Margaret watched her go, her heart breaking. She hates me, doesn't she? Lucas sighed, moving to sit beside Margaret. She doesn't hate you. She's confused, hurt. We all are, but we're here now, and we're going to figure this out together. Margaret leaned into him, and Lucas wrapped his arm around her, feeling the familiar warmth he had missed for so long. For a moment they sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Margaret spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. There's something else you need to know, Lucas. Something I've been afraid to tell you. Lucas tensed, bracing himself for more bad news. What is it? Margaret took a deep breath, then said, Hannah, she's not an only child. She has a brother. Lucas felt as if the wind had been knocked out of him. A brother? He repeated, stunned. We have a son. Margaret nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. His name is Ethan. He's 19 now. Conrad, he took him away when he was born. Said it was safer to keep them separated. I haven't seen him in years, but I know Conrad's been keeping tabs on him. Lucas stood up abruptly, overwhelmed by this new revelation. A son. He had a son he had never known about. A child who had grown up without him. Just like Hannah. The weight of everything he had missed, everything that had been stolen from him, crashed down on him all at once. Where is he? Lucas demanded, his voice hoarse with emotion. Where's our son, Margaret? Before Margaret could answer, they heard a commotion outside. Hannah's voice raised in alarm, cut through the air. Dad, Mom, you need to see this. They rushed outside to find Hannah standing at the edge of the clearing, pointing at something in the distance. As Lucas followed her gaze, he saw a plume of smoke rising above the trees, accompanied by the faint wail of sirens. That's coming from the direction of town, Hannah said, her face pale. Something's wrong. Lucas's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to find a text message from an unknown number. You should have left well enough alone, brother. Ah. Now everyone you love will pay the price. A chill ran down Lucas's spine as he realized the implications. Conrad knew they had found Margaret, and now he was making his move. We need to go, Lucas said urgently, turning to Margaret and Hannah. It's not safe here anymore. Conrad knows we're here, and he's retaliating. Margaret's eyes widened in fear. But where can we go? He'll find us wherever we run. Lucas set his jaw, a determined glint in his eye. We're not running anymore. We're going to find Ethan, and then we're going to end this once and for all. As they hurried to Lucas's car, Hannah hung back, her expression troubled. Dad, she said hesitantly, there's something I need to tell you. Something I found out while I was investigating on my own. Lucas paused, noting the serious tone in his daughter's voice. What is it, Hannah? Hannah took a deep breath, then said, I think I know where Ethan is, and I think he might be working for Conrad. The revelation hit Lucas like a physical blow. His son, working for the man who had torn their family apart. It seemed impossible, and yet, given everything else they had learned, he knew it could be true. As they piled into the car, the smoke from the distant fire growing thicker, Lucas felt the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. He had a family to protect now, a wife he had just found again, a daughter he was only beginning to know, and a son who might be their enemy. The road ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, but Lucas was determined to see it through. Whatever it took, he would reunite his family and bring Conrad to justice. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. But this time, Lucas wasn't playing alone. This time, he had something worth fighting for. As they drove away from the cabin, leaving behind the life Margaret had known for 2 decades, Lucas caught her eye in the rearview mirror. Despite everything, despite the years of separation and the challenges that lay ahead, he saw a glimmer of hope in her gaze. But it was enough. It had to be enough. The search for Ethan and the confrontation with Conrad loomed before them. a daunting task that would test their newfound family bonds to their limits. But as they sped towards an uncertain future, Lucas felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known in years. Whatever came next, they would face it together. As a family. The city lights blurred past as Lucas drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The revelation about Ethan working for Conrad had shaken him to his core, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it now. They needed a plan. "Hannah," he said, breaking the tense silence in the car, "you said you know where Ethan might be. Tell us everything." "Eba." Hannah shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I've been doing some digging on my own," she admitted. "I found some financial records linking Conrad to a private school upstate. Ridgemont Academy. I think that's where Ethan's been all this time." Margaret gasped from the back seat. "Ridgemont? But that's one of the most prestigious schools in the country. How could Conrad afford that?" Lucas's jaw tightened. He couldn't. Not with his legitimate income. This goes deeper than we thought. As they drove, Lucas filled them in on what he and Hannah had learned from Sarah. The flash drive had revealed a complex web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and shady business dealings. Conrad wasn't just a successful restaurateur, he was at the center of a vast criminal network. "But why?" Hannah asked, her voice tinged with frustration. "Why go to all this trouble? Why tear our family apart?" Lucas sighed heavily. "Power," he said simply. "Conrad's always craved it. He saw our family, our success, as something he could never have. So he set out to take it all for himself." Margaret leaned forward, her face pale in the dim light of the car. "There's more to it than that," she said softly. "Conrad, he was obsessed with me. He told me once, when he'd had too much to drink, that he'd loved me from the moment he saw me, that he couldn't stand seeing me with his brother." The car swerved slightly as Lucas processed this information. "His brother," he repeated, his voice hollow. "God, I still can't believe he kept that from me for so long." They lapsed into silence again, each lost in their own thoughts. As they neared the outskirts of the city, Lucas's phone buzzed with another message. He asked Hannah to read it. "It's from Sarah," Hannah said, her brow furrowed. "She says Conrad's on the move. He's called a meeting of his top lieutenants at your restaurant, Dad. The original one." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. The restaurant where it had all begun, where he and Conrad had started their empire. It felt fitting, in a twisted way, that it would all come to a head there. "We need to get to Ethan first," Margaret said urgently. "If he's really working for Conrad, he might be in danger." Lucas nodded, making a sharp turn onto the highway heading upstate. "Ridgemont Academy it is," he said grimly, "but we need to be careful. If Conrad's got people at the school, they'll be watching for us." As they drove through the night, the full scope of Conrad's conspiracy began to unfold. Hannah pored over the documents on Sarah's flash drive, piecing together the intricate web of lies and manipulation. "It's not just the restaurant business," she said, her voice filled with disbelief. "Dad, Conrad's been using your companies as a front for money laundering, drug trafficking, even human smuggling. He's built an entire criminal empire right under your nose." Lucas felt sick. All those years, all those successes he'd been so proud of, tainted by his brother's greed and ambition. "How did I not see it?" he murmured, more to himself than to the others. Margaret reached out, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "He fooled all of us, Lucas. He was always good at hiding his true nature." As dawn broke, they approached the gates of Ridgemont Academy. The school was an imposing structure, all ivy-covered brick and manicured lawns. It looked more like a fortress than a place of learning. "How do we get in?" Hannah asked, eyeing the security cameras at the gate. Lucas took a deep breath, steeling himself. "We don't," he said. "I'm going in alone. You two stay here. Keep the car running. If anything goes wrong, if you don't hear from me in an hour, you leave. Jet as far away as you can." "No," Margaret and Hannah protested in unison. "We're in this together," Hannah insisted. "We're not letting you face this alone." Lucas looked at them, feeling a surge of love and pride. Despite everything, despite the years of separation and pain, they were a family, united. "All right," he conceded, "but we do this carefully. No unnecessary risks." They approached the gate, Lucas taking the lead. He pressed the intercom button, his heart pounding. "Ridgemont Academy, how may I assist you?" a crisp voice answered. Lucas cleared his throat. "My name is Lucas Johnson. I'm here to see my son, Ethan." There was a long pause. "Then I'm sorry, sir, but we have no student by that name enrolled here." Lucas felt a flash of anger. "Listen," he said, his voice low and intense. "I know he's here, and I know Conrad Hawthorne has been paying for his education. So unless you want me to go to the press with what I know about this school's connection to organized crime, I suggest you open this gate right now." Another pause, longer this time. Then, without a word, the gate began to swing open. As they walked up the long driveway, Lucas felt a mix of anticipation and dread. He was about to meet his son for the first time, a son who might very well be his enemy. They were met at the front door by a stern-looking woman in a suit. "Mr. Johnson," she said coolly, "I'm Headmistress Blackwood. I must say your allegations are most disturbing. Perhaps we should discuss this in my office." Lucas shook his head. "I'm not here to discuss anything. I'm here to see my son." Blackwood's lips thinned into a tight line. "Very well," she said. "Follow me." She led them through the opulent halls of the school, past classrooms where students in crisp uniforms sat at attention. Finally, they reached a door marked Student Lounge. "He's in there," Blackwood said, "but I warn you, Mr. Johnson, Ethan may not be the boy you're expecting." With that ominous statement, she opened the door. The lounge was empty save for one person. A young man stood by the window, his back to them. As the door opened, he turned. Lucas felt his breath catch in his throat. It was like looking at a younger version of himself. The same strong jaw, the same intense eyes. But there was something else there too, a hardness that Lucas didn't recognize. "Ethan," Margaret whispered, her voice choked with emotion. The young man's eyes flickered between them, his expression unreadable. "So," he said, his voice cool and detached, "the prodigal family returns." Lucas took a step forward. "Ethan, I know this must be a shock. We have so much to explain." "Save it," Ethan cut him off. "I know why you're here. Uncle Conrad warned me you might come." The casual use of Uncle Conrad felt like a slap in the face. Lucas struggled to keep his composure. "Ethan, whatever Conrad's told you, it's not the whole truth. He's been lying to all of us for years." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Lying? The only liars I see are the people who abandoned me, who left me to be raised by strangers while they went off to live their own lives." Margaret made a small, wounded sound. "No, Ethan, that's not what happened. We didn't abandon you. Conrad took you from us. He gave me a life," Ethan snapped, "and education opportunities, more than you ever did." Hannah, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "He's been using you, Ethan. Using all of us. Conrad's not who you think he is." Ethan's gaze shifted to Hannah, a flicker of curiosity breaking through his cold demeanor. "And who are you supposed to be?" "I'm your sister," Hannah said softly. "And I've been looking for you for a long time." For a moment, Ethan's mask slipped, revealing a glimpse of the confused, hurt boy beneath. But then his walls slammed back into place. "It doesn't matter," he said flatly. "You're too late. Uncle Conrad's plan is already in motion. By this time tomorrow, everything will change." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. "What plan, Ethan? What's Conrad going to do?" Ethan smiled, a cold, mirthless expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Why don't you ask him yourself?" he said, nodding towards the window. They all turned to look. In the distance, they could see a helicopter descending onto the school's expansive lawn. And stepping out of it, his face set in a triumphant smirk, was Conrad. The final confrontation was about to begin, and Lucas realized with a sinking heart that he was not nearly as prepared as he'd thought. The game had changed once again, and this time, the stakes were higher than ever. So the sight of Conrad stepping out of the helicopter sent a jolt of adrenaline through Lucas. He turned to his family, his mind racing to formulate a plan. "We need to get out of here," he said urgently. "Now." But Ethan moved swiftly, blocking the door. "I don't think so," he said, his voice cold. "Uncle Conrad wants to talk to you all, And that's exactly what's going to happen. Hannah stepped forward, her eyes pleading. Ethan, please. You don't understand what's really going on here. Conrad is not who you think he is. Addison's expression flickered for a moment, a hint of uncertainty crossing his face. But before he could respond, the door burst open. Conrad strode in, flanked by two burly men who were clearly armed. Well, well, Conrad said, his voice dripping with false warmth. The whole family together at last. How touching. Lucas instinctively moved to stand in front of Margaret and Hannah. It's over, Conrad, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. We know everything. The money laundering, the drug trafficking, all of it. It's time to end this. Conrad laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the room. Oh, Lucas, always so naive. This isn't ending. It's only just beginning. He turned to Ethan, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. You've done well, my boy. I knew I could count on you. Ethan nodded, but Lucas noticed a flicker of doubt in his son's eyes. There was still hope. What's your endgame here, Conrad? Lucas demanded. What could possibly be worth destroying your own family? Conrad's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold fury. Family? You dare talk to me about family? You took everything from me, Lucas. The woman I loved, the success, the respect. Well, now I'm taking it all back. He snapped his fingers, and his men moved forward, grabbing Lucas and Margaret. Hannah cried out, but Ethan held her back, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Take them to the helicopter, Conrad ordered. It's time we settled this once and for all. As they were marched across the lawn, Lucas's mind raced. He caught Margaret's eye, seeing the same determination there that he felt. They had to find a way out of this, not just for themselves, but for their children. The helicopter ride was tense and silent. Conrad sat across from them, a triumphant smirk on his face. Ethan sat next to him, but Lucas noticed his son's gaze kept flickering towards Hannah, who was staring out the window, her face pale but resolute. They landed on the roof of a skyscraper in the heart of the city. With a jolt, Lucas recognized it as the headquarters of their restaurant empire. Conrad had brought them back to where it all began. Welcome home, brother, Conrad said mockingly as they were led into a luxurious penthouse office. Do you like what I've done with the place? Lucas looked around, taking in the opulent decor, the wall of monitors showing various restaurant locations and what looked like illegal operations. This was never about the restaurants, was it? He said quietly. This was all just a front for your real business. Conrad's smile widened. Finally catching on, are we? Yes, Lucas. While you were playing at being a legitimate businessman, I was building an empire that you're going to sign over to me right now. He gestured to a stack of documents on the desk. Sign these, transferring all your assets and companies to me, and I might consider letting your precious family live. Margaret gasped. You can't be serious, Conrad. This is madness. Conrad's eyes flashed dangerously. Madness? No, my dear Margaret, this is justice. This is me taking back what should have been mine all along. Lucas stood his ground, meeting his brother's gaze. And if I refuse? Conrad's smile turned cruel. Then you get to watch as I destroy everything you love, piece by piece, starting with her. He nodded towards Hannah. Ethan, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. Uncle Conrad, you said no one would get hurt. You said no one would get hurt, you promised. I demused. Quiet, boy, Conrad snapped. This is adult business. You've played your part, now step aside. Lucas saw his opening. He turned to his son, his voice urgent. Ethan, listen to me. I know we've failed you. I know you have every reason to hate us. But this man, the man you call uncle, he's been lying to you your entire life. He didn't save you, he stole you from us. And Ethan's eyes widened, confusion and pain evident on his face. No, that's not. Uncle Conrad wouldn't. You would, Hannah interjected, a voice soft but firm. Ethan, I've spent years trying to find you, to uncover the truth. Conrad is not who he pretends to be. He's a criminal, a manipulator. He's torn our family apart for his own gain. Conrad's face contorted with rage. Enough, he roared. He pulled out a gun, pointing it at Lucas. Sign the papers or I start shooting. Your choice, brother. The room froze. Lucas could feel Margaret trembling beside him, could see the fear in Hannah's eyes. But it was Ethan he focused on. His son stood there, his face a battleground of emotions, loyalty warring with dawning realization. "Ethan," Lucas said softly, "I know we've let you down, and I'm more sorry for that than you can ever know. But right now I'm asking you to trust us. To be the man I know you can be. The man your mother and I always believed you would become." For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was Conrad's heavy breathing, his hand shaking slightly as he held the gun. Then, in a blur of motion, Ethan acted. He lunged forward, grabbing Conrad's arm. The gun went off, the shot going wide and shattering a window. Lucas sprang into action, tackling Conrad to the ground. The two brothers grappled, years of pent-up anger and resentment fueling their struggle. "Hannah, Margaret, run!" Lucas shouted as he fought to keep Conrad pinned. But they didn't run. Instead, Hannah rushed to help Ethan subdue Conrad's men, while Margaret grabbed the phone, frantically dialing for help. The fight was brutal and chaotic. Conrad fought like a cornered animal, all pretense of sophistication gone. But Lucas had something Conrad didn't: a family to fight for. With a final desperate surge of strength, he managed to knock the gun from Conrad's hand, sending it skittering across the floor. Suddenly, the room was filled with the sound of sirens. Police burst through the door, weapons drawn. "Freeze, hands where we can see them." Conrad, realizing it was over, slumped in defeat. As he was handcuffed and led away, he turned to Lucas one last time. "This isn't over, brother," he spat. "You haven't seen the last of me." Lucas watched him go, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Relief, anger, sadness, and underneath it all, a profound sense of exhaustion. It was over. Finally, truly over. He turned to his family. Margaret was there in an instant, throwing her arms around him. Hannah joined the embrace, tears streaming down her face. And then, hesitantly, Ethan stepped forward. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I didn't know, I didn't understand." Lucas reached out, pulling his son into the family hug. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're here now. That's all that matters." As the police swarmed the penthouse, gathering evidence and taking statements, the Johnson family stood together, battered but unbroken. They had faced their darkest hour and come out the other side, stronger for it. Later, as they sat together in a quiet corner of the police station, Lucas looked at his reunited family. There was still so much to process, so much healing to be done. But for the first time in 21 years, he felt hope. Real, tangible hope. "What happens now?" Hannah asked, voicing the question on all their minds. Lucas took a deep breath. "Now," he said, "we start over, together." Margaret squeezed his hand, a small smile on her tired face. "Together," she echoed. Ethan, still looking a bit shell-shocked, nodded slowly. I'd like that," he said quietly. As dawn broke over the city, casting a golden light through the station windows, the Johnson family began the long process of healing. They had a lot to talk about, a lot to work through, but they would do it as a family, united at last against whatever challenges the future might bring. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be trials to face, truths to confront, and wounds to heal. But as Lucas looked at the faces of his wife and children, he knew that together they could then the nightmare was over. It was time to wake up to a new day, a new beginning. A chance to rebuild what had been lost, and to create something even stronger in its place. As they left the police station, stepping out into the bright morning light, Lucas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The past could not be changed, but the future was theirs to shape. And for the first time in over 2 decades, he looked forward to that future with hope, love, and the unshakable knowledge that no matter what came next, they would face it together, as a family. At last, the weeks following Conrad's arrest were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media frenzy, and emotional upheaval for the Johnson family. As the full extent of Conrad's crimes came to light, Lucas found himself struggling to reconcile the brother he thought he knew with the criminal mastermind who had manipulated them all for decades. One crisp autumn morning, Lucas sat in his home office, poring over the mountain of paperwork that had become his new reality. The task of untangling his legitimate businesses from Conrad's illicit operations was daunting but necessary. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Dad," it was Ethan, still hesitant in his new role as part of the family. "Can we talk?" Lucas immediately set aside his work. "Of course, come in." Ethan entered, his posture tense. He'd been staying with him since the confrontation at Ridgemont, but there was still an awkwardness, a distance that neither knew quite how to bridge. "I've been thinking," Ethan began, his voice low, "about everything that happened, about my part in it all. I want you to know how sorry I am." Lucas felt a surge of empathy for his son. "Ethan, you don't have to." "Please, let me finish," Ethan interrupted, his eyes meeting Lucas's with a determination that reminded Lucas so much of himself. "I was angry for so long. I believed every lie Conrad told me about you and Mom. I wanted to hurt you the way I thought you'd hurt me. But now I see I was just a pawn in his game." Lucas stood, moving around the desk to stand in front of his son. "We were all pawns, Ethan. Conrad manipulated all of us, but that's over now. What matters is where we go from here." Ethan nodded, blinking back tears. "I want to make things right. I want to be part of this family if you'll have me." Without hesitation, Lucas pulled Ethan into a tight embrace. "You've always been part of this family," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "So always?" "Always." As they separated, both men wiping at their eyes, Margaret appeared in the doorway, a gentle smile on her face. "I thought I might find you two in here," she said. "Hannah's made breakfast. Why don't you join us?" The family gathered around the kitchen table, the atmosphere lighter than it had been in weeks. As they ate, sharing small talk and tentative jokes, Lucas couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come, yet he knew there was still a long road ahead. "I've been thinking," he said as they finished their meal, "about the future, about our family. I think we need to get away for a while, all of us." Hannah looked up, curiosity in her eyes. "What do you mean, Dad?" Lucas took a deep breath. "I mean leaving the city, taking some time to just be together without all the pressure and scrutiny. There's a cabin I own up in the mountains. It's secluded, peaceful. I think it might be good for us to spend some time there, to really get to know each other again." Margaret reached out, squeezing his hand. "I think that's a wonderful idea." Ethan and Hannah exchanged glances, then nodded in agreement. "When do we leave?" Ethan asked. "As soon as we can get things arranged here," Lucas replied, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "I'll need to set things up with the lawyers, make sure the businesses are in good hands while we're gone." The next few days were a flurry of activity as they prepared for their retreat. Lucas worked tirelessly to ensure everything was in order, determined to leave behind the chaos and focus solely on his family. Finally, on a crisp morning, they piled into Lucas's SUV, the trunk loaded with supplies and luggage. As they drove out of the city, leaving behind the towering skyscrapers and bustling streets, Lucas felt a sense of peace wash over him. The drive to the cabin was long but not unpleasant. They talked, shared stories, and even laughed, something that had been all too rare in recent weeks. As they wound their way up into the mountains, the air grew cooler and cleaner, the scenery more breathtaking. When they finally arrived at the cabin, the sun was just beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the rustic structure. It was larger than the one Margaret had been kept in, but still cozy and inviting. "It's beautiful," Hannah breathed as they stepped out of the car. Lucas smiled, wrapping an arm around Margaret's shoulders. "Welcome home," he said softly. "At least for a little while." That evening, as they sat around a crackling fire, mugs of hot cocoa in hand, the conversation turned to more serious matters. "I know we've all been through a lot," Lucas began, his voice gentle but firm. "And I know there's still a lot we need to work through, but I want you all to know how grateful I am to have you here, to have this chance to be a family again." Margaret nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I've dreamed of this for so long," she said. "To have all of us together, safe and free. It almost doesn't feel real." "It's real, Mom," Hannah assured her, reaching out to take her hand. We're here, and we're not going anywhere." Ethan, who had been quiet for most of the evening, finally spoke up. "I still have so many questions," he admitted, "about the past, about what really happened. I want to understand." Lucas nodded, understanding the need for truth. "We'll answer everything we can, Ethan. No more secrets, no more lies, that's a promise." Over the next few weeks, the Johnson family began the slow, sometimes painful process of healing. There were difficult conversations, tears shed over lost time, and missed opportunities. But there was also laughter, shared meals, and quiet moments of connection. They hiked in the surrounding forests, teaching Ethan and Hannah the names of trees and birds. They spent evenings playing board games, something they had never done as a complete family before, and gradually the tension began to ease, replaced by a growing sense of belonging. One night, as Lucas stood on the cabin's porch, gazing up at the star-filled sky, Margaret joined him. She slipped her hand into his, a gesture that felt both familiar and new. "Do you think we'll ever truly get past all of this?" she asked softly. Lucas turned to her, taking in the face he had missed for so long. "I think we already are," he replied, "and it won't happen overnight, and there will always be scars. But look how far we've come already." Margaret leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I never stopped loving you, she whispered. "Even when I couldn't remember why, even when Conrad tried to make me hate you, there was always a part of me that knew the truth." Lucas felt his heart swell with emotion. "I never stopped loving you either," he said, his voice rough. "Not for a single day." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms under the vast canopy of stars, Lucas felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. They had weathered the storm, faced their demons, and come out stronger on the other side. Inside the cabin, Hannah and Ethan were engaged in a heated game of chess, their laughter drifting out into the night. The sound filled Lucas with joy and hope for the future. They still had challenges to face. Eventually they would have to return to the city to deal with the aftermath of Conrad's crimes and rebuild their lives. But Lucas knew now that whatever came their way, they would face it together. As a family, they had been broken, scattered to the winds by lies and manipulation. But now they were whole again, stronger for having been tested, more appreciative of the bonds that tied them together. Lucas took a deep breath of the crisp mountain air, feeling truly alive for the first time in decades. The past could not be changed, but the future was theirs to shape, and he was determined to make it a future filled with love, trust, and the unbreakable bonds of family. As they turned to go back inside, joining their children in the warm glow of the cabin, Lucas knew that this was more than just a new chapter. It was a whole new book waiting to be written, and he couldn't wait to see what stories it would hold. As autumn faded into winter, the Johnson family found themselves reluctant to leave the sanctuary of the mountain cabin. The world beyond seemed distant, almost unreal compared to the cocoon of healing they had created for themselves. But they knew they couldn't hide away forever. On their last night in the cabin, they gathered around the fireplace, mugs of steaming hot chocolate in hand, to discuss their future. "I've been thinking," Lucas began, his voice soft but determined, "about the restaurant empire, about everything we've built." Margaret reached out, squeezing his hand encouragingly. "What are you thinking, dear?" Lucas took a deep breath. "I think it's time for a change. A big one. I want to sell most of the restaurants, keep just a few key locations. Use the money to start something new, something that can truly make a difference." Hannah leaned forward, curiosity sparking in her eyes. "What kind of difference, Dad?" "A foundation," Lucas replied, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "One dedicated to helping families torn apart by circumstances beyond their control, reuniting lost loved ones, providing support and resources for healing. I want to take everything we've been through and use it to help others." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this idea. Then Ethan spoke up, surprising them all. "I want to help," he said firmly. "I've spent so much of my life being angry, being part of the problem. I want to be part of the solution now." Lucas felt a surge of pride for his son. "I'd be honored to have you involved, Ethan. All of you, if you're interested." Margaret's eyes shone with unshed tears. "It's a beautiful idea, Lucas. A way to turn all our pain into something positive. Hannah nodded enthusiastically. "Count me in too. I think this is what we were meant to do all along." As they discussed the details, fleshing out ideas and sharing visions for the future, Lucas felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the crackling fire. This was what family was supposed to be, supporting each other, working together towards a common goal. The next morning, as they packed up the car to head back to the city, there was a sense of anticipation rather than dread. They were no longer running from their past, but moving purposefully towards a future they would shape together. The drive back was filled with animated discussion about their plans. By the time they reached the outskirts of the city, they had a rough outline for the Johnson Family Foundation, each member excited about the role they would play. As they approached their home, however, Lucas noticed a figure standing on the front steps. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized Sarah, the woman who had helped expose Conrad's crimes. They pulled up to the house, and Sarah approached the car, her face grave. "I'm sorry to ambush you like this," she said as they got out, "but there's something you need to know." Lucas felt Margaret tense beside him. "What is it, Sarah?" he asked, bracing himself for bad news. Sarah took a deep breath. "It's Conrad. He's escaped custody." The words hit Lucas like a physical blow. He heard gasps from Hannah and Ethan, felt Margaret's hand tighten in his. "How?" Lucas managed to ask, his mind reeling. "He had help on the inside," Sarah explained. "Apparently his network was even more extensive than we thought. The police are searching for him," but she trailed off, the implication clear. Conrad was in the wind. For a moment, Lucas felt the old fear and anger rising up inside him. The thought of Conrad out there, potentially plotting revenge, was terrifying. But then he looked at his family, at Margaret's determined face, at Hannah and Ethan standing tall and unafraid, and he felt something else. Strength. "Thank you for telling us, Sarah," Lucas said, his voice steady. "We appreciate the warning." Sarah nodded, looking relieved. "What will you do now?" Lucas turned to his family, seeing the same resolve in their eyes that he felt in his heart. "We're not going to run," he said firmly. "We're not going to hide. We're going to live our lives and build something good. If Conrad comes for us, we'll face him. Together." Margaret stepped forward, linking her arm with Lucas's. "We're done being victims," she added. "Whatever happens, we'll handle it as a family." Sarah smiled, a hint of admiration in her eyes. "You've all come a long way," she observed. "I'm glad to see it." As Sarah left, the Johnson family stood united on their front steps. The news of Conrad's escape hung over them like a dark cloud, but it didn't diminish the light they had found together. "So," Ethan said, breaking the silence, "what's our first move with the foundation?" Lucas couldn't help but smile at his son's determination. "Well," he said, leading them into the house, "I think we start by reaching out to other families who've been through similar ordeals. We learn from them, see how we can help." As they settled into the living room, the conversation flowing easily despite the shadow of Conrad's escape, Lucas felt a profound sense of peace. Yes, there were still challenges ahead. Conrad was out there somewhere, and they would have to be vigilant. The foundation would take hard work and dedication to get off the ground. But looking at his family, Margaret's gentle smile, Hannah's eager ideas, Ethan's quiet determination, Lucas knew they could handle whatever came their way. They had been broken, scattered, and nearly destroyed, but they had found their way back to each other, forging bonds stronger than ever before. Whatever the future held, whether it was triumph or tribulation, they would face it together. The Johnson family had weathered the storm and emerged not just survivors, but stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. As night fell over the city, the Johnson home was filled with warmth, laughter, and hope. They had a long road ahead, but they were ready to walk it side by side. The past had tried to tear them apart, but the future, their future, was theirs to build together. And so, as they planned and dreamed and loved, the Johnson family stepped forward into that future, not with fear, but with courage, determination, and the unshakable knowledge that together they could overcome anything. Their story wasn't ending, it was just beginning anew. In the depths of our darkest moments, when lies threaten to tear us apart and the past casts long shadows over our future, remember this: Love is stronger than deceit, forgiveness more powerful than revenge, and family bonds can withstand even the fiercest storms. The Johnson family's journey teaches us that no matter how broken we may feel, how lost or betrayed, there is always hope for healing and redemption. It reminds us that our past does not define us. It is our choices in the present that shape our future. To those who feel alone, remember that somewhere out there, someone is searching for you. To those burdened by guilt, know that forgiveness, both giving and receiving, can set you free. And to those who have lost faith in family, believe that it's never too late to rebuild, to reconnect, to start anew. Life may scatter us, circumstances may test us, and time may change us. But like the Johnsons, we have the power to choose unity over division, love over hate, and hope over despair. Our scars can become our strength, our pain our purpose. So hold on to those you love, fight for your family, not against them. Be brave enough to trust again, to love again, to hope again. For in the end, it's not the years of separation that define us, but the moments of connection that sustain us. Remember, every ending is just a new beginning in disguise. Your story isn't over, it's simply turning to a new chapter. And together, bound by love and strengthened by adversity, we can write the most beautiful chapters of our lives. In the face of life's greatest challenges, let us choose family. Let us choose love. Let us choose hope, for in these choices we find not just survival, but true, lasting triumph. As we conclude this emotional journey with the Johnson family, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story touched your heart or resonated with you in any way, please consider leaving a 1 in the comments. Your support means the world to us. And if there were aspects of the story you didn't quite agree with or would like to discuss further, we welcome your insights. Feel free to share your perspective in the comments below. Your feedback helps us grow and create even better content. Lastly, if you enjoyed this story and would like to see more like it, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And your subscription is a powerful way to support our team and encourage us to keep bringing you compelling narratives that explore the depths of human emotion and family bonds. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community. Together, we can continue to share tales that inspire, heal, and connect us all.